politicians, but not with politics in general. We are very lucky in this country. We live in a democratic society. We have the right of free speech, but have we used that right correctly? How are our media portraying our politicians? How are our politicians portraying themselves? Are we making this a really genuine type of engagement with society that will encourage our young people? Because I have met very few young people, and I have spoken at great length to young people about the need for them to engage with society, that at my age now I am soon passing the mantle over to the next generation. My children and most other children I know would not touch politics with a 40-foot barge pole. So we have got a problem. The young people who are committed, who are able, probably the best educated generation we've ever had, probably the generation who've had the most opportunities, do not want to become politicians. They do not want to become the political leaders of their country. So why is that? We have got to look carefully at our politics, not with party politics, not with party politics in mind, with the politics of the people. And why are we not engaging? Why are the brightest and the best not going into politics? Why is it that people feel that politics is simply something that you do if you want to get something out of it, and find it very hard to believe that your raison d'etre for being in politics is that you want to give something to your community, that you feel you have had a relatively charmed life and you want to ensure that others can also have that kind of life. We have a very idealistic generation. Even if they're kids who perhaps are not as committed to religion or not as committed to some of the values that maybe their forefathers were committed to, they are committed to a better world. These are the kids who are going to Africa to work as volunteers. These are the kids who are going around the world helping to change the world, but they don't want to change their own country. They don't want to engage with their own city. So why is that? We have to look at that, and we've got to give them a reason. And one of the things I would say to you is that we have to get rid of clientelism in politics. I'm going to be facing the electorate in June. One of the main questions that people will ask when we knock on the door is, well, what did you do for me? You know, did you get me a house? If you're in a middle class area, well, then that's not the question. So we have to stop that holding clinics and people queuing up to ask a politician to get them something that they're perfectly capable of getting themselves, and a politician can't get them something that they're not entitled to. And politicians have to be strong enough and courageous enough to say to people, as a politician, I will not get you something that you're not entitled to, and you're queuing up at my clinic to ask me to get something that if you lift the phone, a very competent official will be able to give you, and give you much more information than I will. So we have to look at how we have operated, certainly politics at the local level and indeed at the national level. We have to be prepared to challenge that politics, because the failure to challenge it will be the option that our young people will not engage, and simply those who do want to get something for themselves will be the people who go into politics, and not the people who really genuinely have something to contribute to politics and who can be the real political leaders of our country. Because the reality is we get the politicians we deserve, and we need to look at how we're going to engage some of our other people. Another question, and it's a very thorny one, that is certainly rising, in my opinion, in the city, and that is the discussion about immigration. And we are going to have to grasp that nettle, and it's going to be a very, very difficult one. Because people are afraid to have that conversation, lest there be racism, lest there be questions asked that we don't want to ask. If we fail to grasp that question, if we do not say, integration or multiculturalism, what is the route Dublin wants to go, then we will face the same problems that Britain and France. We will have the zone rouge that they have in Paris. We will have the riots eventually if we do not challenge that. On the one hand, we are a city that are well used since Viking times to having people coming in, to being brought into our society, becoming more Irish than the Irish themselves, as they used to say, being a part of Dublin. It is important that Dublin is a mosaic of all of the people who come, that we challenge, that we value, that we cherish all of the cultures and values of every single person who comes to Dublin. And when people say to me, what's a Dubliner? I say a Dubliner is a person who's living in Dublin today. I'm not interested in the long history, well, I'm Dublin 5 generations back. You're a Dubliner if you're living here today, and when you leave, then that's another story. But I went to visit hospitals at Christmas. There were no cribs in the hospitals because people did not want to offend Muslims. Now, some of my closest friends are Muslims. I don't know any of them who were offended by a crib. But if we go so far to being politically correct and not holding some of the values that are the Dublin, that are the values of Ireland, then what you will have is you will have the Irish people alienated, because I've had a large amount of people commenting to me about things like cribs or about things like, well, everything is for the multicultural and we're so busy valuing all these other cultures, we're not actually, valuing our own. We have to ask ourselves, what is the Dublin culture of today? How do we merge the incoming cultures while remaining very, very close to the culture that we had? That debate of integration, multiculturalism, whatever route we choose to take, let it be a route that we have chosen, not simply a path that we went down. Let's have the conversation. It will be painful and it needs to be very, very carefully handled so that everybody feels value in it. But if you don't have the conversation, then there are serious risks for all of us. So I suppose that's really my main thoughts on where I am. The reality is that the democracy and the well-being of our city will depend on our civic engagement. It will depend on the strength of participation by people, but we need to find ways to do that. We have the development plan, which looks at the bricks and mortar of the city. We're looking at economic development plans. Where is the social development plan? Where is the person who sits down and says, right, we have all of these issues in the city, now let's put them all together because they are going to have to be addressed as part of the wider picture, as part of the development, the strengthening, the burgeoning of Dublin. Because Dublin is a wonderful city. We all know that no matter where you travel around the world, there are very few that can compete with it in terms of quality of life, quality of the type of people, the wit, the humour, all of the various ways. We have an awful lot going for us, but we need to mind that it's a very fragile flower. The whole idea of community and participation is something that needs to be strengthened. So clearly there are challenges ahead. We have choices to make, but that is the great thing, that we actually do have choices to make, that we can actually look to our own destiny and see how we are going to form and shape this city. But we can't just let it shape itself in any indiscriminate way. We've got to find a route that will value as many of our citizens, have as active a participation in the city as possible, and a willingness, I suppose, to move forward. So I would say that really, the seeds of our future are sown in the past and they're very, very strong, but they will only be brought into our present if we plan it properly and if we work towards engaging all of our citizens. So they're my few points for the day.